Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stepanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. My guest today is Chris, a licensed substance abuse and mental health counselor. He's a devoted husband, father of 3 beautiful girls, and recently experienced the joy of becoming a grandfather to yet another. Chris has owned First Avenue to Freedom recovery houses for men in Daytona Beach, Florida for 16 years. Get ready to be inspired as Chris shares his journey from addiction to a career and the positive changes it brought to his life. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, hi, Jessica. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. So if you could just start at the beginning of your life and bring us up until that decision that you made to overcome addiction and help others do the same.
Okay, well, definitely, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy that you asked me to do this because I really do believe, like, without the hope that we have and help create for others that are suffering with addiction and other things, there's not much optimism in people's lives that are going through what they're going through. So I really believe it takes stories like ours to help these people. Going back and when you asked me to do this, I started reflecting on my life, and I thought, like, what could maybe be helpful to help some of these people that are listening, hopefully. And what I came up with was, there's a lot of people that have addictions, and there's a lot of people that have alcoholism, and a lot of the questions that they probably have are like, why, like, why me? And
Sure.
it kind of brings me back to, like, when I was a younger little boy, and some of the reasons that I maybe came up with for, like, why I got into the lifestyle I got into and the people I started hanging out with and stuff. And it kind of, I'm not trying to, like, be a victim here or anything. I'm just trying to work through some of the things that were going on in my life when I first picked up drugs and alcohol. And what I can
Sure.
tell you is that as a little boy, I was, like, always afraid for whatever reasons, not really any justifiable or rationalized types of
Mm-hmm.
reasons. Just I felt afraid, and I never felt a part of, like, the little circles of friends that were in the schools or in the neighborhood that I was living in. And there was just, like, a weird thing that was going on with me that I didn't really see others going through. And maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I just really felt like I was, like, unique in that sense, and it kept me isolated and withdrawn from others at that time. And then something started happening in my early childhood where it was like, I guess what you would say, like, a rationalized reason of why I would, like, protect myself, without putting, like, too much out there.
Sure.
There was, like, some abuse going on, and verbally and physically, and then it started with, like, some of the neighborhood kids too, to where I started, you hear about it, and more so now than back then. But, like, I didn't realize it, but, like, I was actually being, like, bullied by some of the kids. And it just started my life in a direction where I, like, just learned how to protect myself and become isolated and withdrawn. So it was happening in my family, and it was happening in the neighborhood that I lived in. And if there was any cause for reason of why I did and started to do what I did, I would say that would probably be one of the big you know, turning points in my life that made me like seek out different types of ways to feel better and
Right.
keep myself safe. So, at a young age, I ran away from home. And, some people are like, wow, you were 10 years old when you ran away from home. That must have been really hard. And I can honestly say that's not how I felt about it. Like when I actually left home at 10 years old, I felt free. I felt
Wow.
safe. I felt like it was like something that I needed to happen for me to, you know, take care of myself in a way where I wasn't getting
Mm-hmm.
harmed anymore. And with that being said, what happened then was I met some people that I thought really had my best interest at heart, and they took care of me, and it wasn't until a few years later that I realized, wow, I probably shouldn't be hanging out with these people, you know, because
Yeah.
they were doing things and having me do things that, I just knew this internal right from wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew like some of the stuff that I was doing was wrong. And I had not really realized it until I was about 13 that I had become addicted to certain substances that they were sort of feeding me. Like
Sure.
they weren't force feeding me. Of course, I was doing it and I felt a part of, and I liked the feeling of like
Mm-hmm.
that I got from it. And so I continued to do it. And it wasn't really until about 13 when there was a few nights where we didn't have the stuff that they were giving us, and I started feeling sick. So then I knew like I was in trouble.
Sure.
And
Mm-hmm.
basically at 13 I really knew like I had this overpowering need for the substances that they were giving me, and from there on it was an awareness that I had like, wow, I need this stuff. However, I couldn't quit doing it. And then what I realized was some of the things we were doing was because we needed this stuff, and I wasn't the only one in that group of people that needed it, and we just kept moving on and doing whatever it took to get what we can
Sure.
get so we can continue being high from this stuff. And at that time alcohol was just like a little bit in my life, and it wasn't like a major contributor to my addiction. However, it was there, and it was easy accessible, and I never really liked the taste of it or anything. So I mean, if you look at that and you think like, why would you do something you don't like the taste of? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the signs that you might have a problem.
Uh-huh.
But at this point in my life, it was really like I felt desired. I felt like the people I was hanging out with cared about me, and I cared about them, and I was a part of something. And
Uh-huh.
you think about it at that age, like you're supposed to be in school, you're supposed to be like learning, you're supposed to be, the society's picture of what a 13-year-old should be doing. That wasn't happening in my life. I was homeless. We were living in the woods. We were
Mm-hmm.
living in abandoned buildings. We were living on the streets. We were hustling. We were scamming. We were doing things like a typical 13-year-old kid and 15, 14-year-old child shouldn't be doing. And I just got caught up in that lifestyle, and it was never really a big deal to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think there was too much wrong with it until like I started hearing stories of some of my older friends that I grew up with in the neighborhood that I lived in. They were like finishing high school and moving on to like college, and had these relationships with women that they were happy with, and all the regular things started happening to the people that I grew up with, and I started wondering like, why isn't that happening for me?
Mm-hmm.
um and not to tell too much of the story of my whole life, but just to maybe hit significant time periods where stuff started opening my awareness up to what my dilemma was. The
Sure.
void that I had inside of me, was not being filled anymore by the people I was hanging out with, and I started wanting more for myself and for my life, and um, it was just like a harder time. And what happened then was I was hanging out in a mall, and one of these recruiter stations was in the mall for the military, and we would
Okay.
like panhandle money and stuff to enough to get like a case of beer and some whatever drugs, and we asked this recruiter, this Navy recruiter, if he would help us out with a few dollars, and he said, "You know what? I'll buy you lunch." And he sat down with us and bought us McDonald's in the mall and basically talked. I was 17 now, and he talked us and me and my friend into like maybe joining in the military, And what
Hmm.
happened after that was like, I wasn't 18 yet. I was like about 4 or 5 months away from being 18, and this guy like took me under his wing for the next few months, and told me that at this time I could take this test, and then I could join the military. And he's like, the only test I have to pass is a UA test, which is a
Hmm.
urinalysis. So for the next 4 months, the first time in my life, I was trying to like not do drugs, and I
Oh.
realized like how severely addicted I was, and I could not stop. And it got down to like 3 days before I was gonna take the UA for the military, and I still couldn't stop doing what I was doing. And at that point, you could probably take a UA on me, and I would have probably failed for at least 3 or 4 substances, and as
Okay.
well as with alcohol. So I was pretty much putting whatever would come my way into my body and into my mouth, and I just could not stop. And but I took the UA anyway. He's like, "Are you going to pass this UA?" And what did we say? Yes, of course I'm going to pass this UA. And and I took it anyway. And I'll tell you what, um about a week later, he called me up, and or I called him up because I didn't have a phone. He told me to call him in about a week to check on the results. And he said, "Look," he said, he said, "I don't know what happened." He's like, "The UA wasn't clean. However, we're gonna give you a chance anyway."
Wow.
And yeah, so like they took me in the military at that age, and put me on the delayed entry program basically until I actually did turn 18, which was less than 30 days after that happened. And so I thought, okay, great. I'm going to quit drinking. I'm going to quit doing drugs. I'm going to be in the military now, and that was my real intention. Like that's really what I wanted to do. I thought maybe, that my mom would hear about it and she would be proud of me, and that kind of stuff would start happening, and my life would change for the better. And um so I went into the military basically, and what happened there was I found a whole bunch of other people that were sort of in the same boat as me. That's a
Sure.
pun because it was the Navy, and
I was going to ask
um,
what branch of the military it was. It was the Navy.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So it was the Navy, and I went through boot camp, and I got to tell you, like boot camp was a very an awakening experience for a guy who had never had any discipline, never learned how to do like the basic things that most people know how to do at that time, like make your bed
Sure.
and all that stuff, and I was the guy on the company that would get the whole company in trouble because my bed wasn't made right, or my locker was messy, or they would catch me like smoking cigarettes in the bathroom, or
Hmm.
stuff like that, and everybody would get mad at me, and we would do like marching parties. And so what happened really was I did an 8-week boot camp in 13 weeks it took me.
Okay.
But I survived and I got through it, and I could probably say that was one of the major turning points in my life where I felt like, okay, I'm doing something that's admirable and
Yeah.
positive, and a step forward into a better future. However, on graduation from boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
after 13 weeks of no drugs, no alcohol, they give you a free pass and they let you go out and celebrate. And what happened was the group of guys I went out with, we all got drunk, of course,
Yeah.
and then I started to learn, okay, these, even though you can't do drugs, you can drink alcohol. And that's what happened for the next 4 years basically. I did a lot of things in the Navy. I was pretty successful as far as like I went to a lot of the schools. I went I was on a submarine
Mm-hmm.
for about 2.5 years, and the reason I did that was because they just kept offering me like more schooling, and that's what I did. And the whole time I was supposed to get my GED, and I never got my GED, and I don't know why they let me continue as they did, but I just they just let me. So what happened was about a year and a half into it, I decided like I do not like the ocean. I do not want to go
Okay.
out on a big ship out in the middle of the ocean and be a sitting duck. And then that's when they offered me submarine school, and
Uh-huh.
that's what I ended up doing. And I was in school for about another year until I was done with all that. And then then I was on submarines. And what happened, I don't know, about 60 days before my last tour, I started messing around with some people at a bar that I was frequenting with others that I was hanging out with, and I started doing cocaine and drinking because cocaine gets out of your system quicker. I thought maybe that I wouldn't get caught, but they talk about the phenomenon of craving that happens with an alcoholic. Well, it also happens with a cocaine addict.
Right, right.
And I got to the point where like I could not stop doing cocaine, and they
Uh-huh.
always did a UA on the whole boat before we would go out to sea, because we were a nuclear submarine, and we're messing with missiles and
Yeah.
torpedoes and high tech stuff. And so they would do a UA, and I did a UA and I failed. And what they offered me then was they offered me treatment, and I turned it down. I said, no way. I don't want to do that. I just want to get out of the Navy. I don't want to be here anymore. And so I was discharged with an other than honorable discharge from the United States Navy. And I say that because, like, to me, when I was in there, up until I started going out to sea, I loved what I was doing. I felt good about myself. Um, I knew that my family was proud of me. Like some of my friends, my past
Sure.
friends that I grew up with were proud of me that I had been doing something different to change my life. And I loved it basically, other than going out to sea, and drugs and alcohol basically took over and took that away from me again. Another thing in my life that I just kind of gave up.
Let's just go back for a moment because, at 10 years old, to be that young and to leave home, and it was interesting because you said, most you left because of fear, but you felt a huge sense of freedom when you left and that it was the right choice. And it was kind
Right.
of like an act of survival in a sense. Like that's a brave act to a 10-year-old boy to leave his home and to then continue to live where most kids are going to middle school 11, 12, 13, 13 on. I think it was 13 until you had said about what was it, 4 years you were homeless, living on the street and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
survival mode all that time. And, drugs took you. And then, but what I find interesting is like when you started to look at your other friends or hear about them, you had that in you that you said, hey, I want to turn this around or I'd like to. And then
Mm-hmm.
you had met that recruiting officer, that
Mm-hmm.
one person. A lot of people have a person that comes in and kind of gives them a little bit of light and takes them under their wing. And he seems to be the first person that did that for you and that kind of put you in a different direction and gave you all these different life experiences. Even though you had that
Hmm.
discharge, you did have that. That would have been that much more time on the street, but it was
Right.
that much more
Yeah,
time
exactly.
in the military. So it could have been a
Hmm.
life-saving mission, in itself. And then what happens next for you?
Yeah, I mean, exactly everything you said is for real, and there's a few other stories in between where there was other people that came into my life and different situations where like they were offering to help me and trying to help me. And the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction is so cunning. Like it'll tell you, you don't need the help. Just like at the end of the
Sure.
Navy, like if I would have just, who knows what would have happened, if I would have accepted the help with them. A lot of my friends I grew up with ended up serving 30 years in the military, and
Hmm.
who knows if that would have happened or not. In our programs, it talks about we don't regret the past, and I
Hmm.
don't regret that at all. However, it does make me wonder, like, what if I would have done this, or what if I would have did that, or if I would have followed them directions instead, how different my life would be, and I wouldn't want to change it. I love my life today. It's really good. It's interesting. It's fun to be able to like pretty much have almost every sort of like situation that's happened in my life. I can have empathy for others that have had some of the same situations in their life. So I wouldn't trade that for anything. So after the Navy, it was a quick downward spiral again to what am I going to do? I felt like I lost my identity, because I was like a military guy now. Now I was ashamed. I felt bad. I was insecure. And I heavily went back to the drugs because now I could and I could get away with it and no one's going to
Hmm.
stop me from doing it. And the drinking, in the Navy had increased tremendously. And I just, for about a year, I was like off the chain completely, and I was about 22 then. And another significant thing that happened was I was living in South Carolina, and the night before I was in this abandoned apartment, and I went to the woods with this homeless guy because I didn't have any food and he had some alcohol, and I didn't have any money, so I'm like hanging out with this
Hmm.
homeless guy in the woods, and he catches this what they call a mudfish,
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. I'd never seen that before. All the years I had been homeless, I'd never experienced this. And he made a fire, and he's like cooking this mudfish, and I guess it was like a big catfish or something, but
Okay.
they called it mudfish. And as I was eating this thing, and we were drinking some nasty whiskey that he had, like bottom
Hmm.
of the shelf type of whiskey, and it hit me like, man, what the heck am I doing? Like, so the next day after that, I made it back to this apartment, and someone knocked on the front door, and it was one of my uncles that my aunt, my dad's sister, had been married to. And he's like, Christian, and I'm like, oh my God. And I remember trying to shut the door, and he put his foot in between the door and the door jam, and he opened it up, and he's like, hey man, he's like, look, we want to try to help you. And I was like, wow. And I just broke down, and I started crying. And
Mm.
it was significant because like I thought like my family didn't care anymore. And this had been probably about a year, 9 months maybe after I had been discharged from the Navy. So I was hiding it from
Sure.
them, I thought, but they already knew. They got a letter right away saying that I was other than honorably discharged, and trying to find me and reach out to me. And
So they
and
were
he
looking
just,
for you that whole time.
yeah, they were looking for me, and it was significant. Like they didn't do anything other than that really, because of course, turned away the help, but it just made me like start to think differently, you know. And what happened a few days after that was Hurricane Hugo, and
Oh,
I
wow.
ended up, yeah, with a friend of mine from the bar. We ended up, well, he ended up renting a car and driving to Florida, and I ended up in Florida like a week after Hurricane Hugo hit, and I
Oh,
never
my
went back
goodness.
after that. Yeah. So, but what happened here in Florida was another significant turn of events was I'm homeless with this guy, and we're like walking down A1A, and he's like, "Hey, let's go to detox." And I didn't know what detox was. But he told me it's a place that we could go to, you know, we could sleep, they'll give you food, and they'll probably even give you some kind of drug to help you like cope, you know?
Oh,
And
sure.
I was like,
Yeah.
all right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I ended up going to detox at that age. What happened in detox was I heard some stories from some people that came in there from a 12-step program that made me realize like, wow, you know, this is me. I relate to them, and maybe if I do what they're doing, maybe it'll help me not continue on the path that I was on, you know. Um so I went to 28-day program after detox instead of just going out onto the street.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
28-day program taught me about the disease of alcoholism. Like I
Mm-hmm.
always thought like I'm crazy, I had no will, I had no self-control. I never really understood why I couldn't stop. You know, like when I
Sure.
didn't want
Yeah.
to do it, I would always do it anyway, no matter what the circumstances that were in front of me, like important things that I had to do. It wasn't enough to keep me from stopping, you know?
Yeah. I can relate
Um,
to that completely because it wasn't until I was around people who taught me what the disease of alcoholism was that I even knew that I thought like you, like I am not pulling it together. I am, showing signs and symptoms of other things. And so we think that's the problem and we go down that avenue. And it's not until you really understand what you're dealing with that you can put a name on it and start to think about getting better. Those people who brought that 12-step meeting to detox, I can remember 15 years ago bringing 12-step meetings to detox and thinking no one's listening, and I
uh-huh.
know that today that someone is listening because you hear this time and again, well, when this group came out here and they were talking, I just caught a sentence and it stuck with me, and then they took a different turn when they were let out. So that service is so important, to which is a lot of what you do today. But
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're right about that too, because I was the guy in that meeting or those meetings during the detox where, like, after the meeting, they would come up and try to talk to me, and I'd be like, I don't want to talk to you, you know, and I would like walk
right.
away, but I was listening, you know, and it's really cool to realize that what you just said, because I know a few guys from going to detox meetings where they were the last ones we would have thought would want to come and to a meeting and get sober, because looking at them during the meeting, you just thought they were like completely out of it and they weren't listening,
Yes.
and they
Yeah.
really were listening, you know. And I was one of those guys too, because I was really listening. I laugh about it now with like some of the stuff like my dad would tell me when I was little, or my mom would say, or my sisters would say, or some older, you know, adults at that time were trying to tell me things to like help me, but I would act as if wouldn't listen or pay attention to what they were saying. But in reality, like I did. This is a disease. It's not entirely my fault. However, knowing like, okay, I have this disease and now I'm aware of you know what it does to me and the potentially fatalness of it if I don't do certain things now, that it's going to get me and it's going to be the end of me, you know, or even worse,
Sure.
I'm going to end up living in this prison cell or whatever because of the ways and means to get more of the lifestyle I was living, that, you know, I would have eventually ended up there too, you know. I have a whole pattern of my life where it was always someone else's fault. Like I remember I was in a meeting at a young, I think I was maybe 22, maybe it was like the first year of going to meetings, but I had told this story of my life and how I was like abused in all different ways, and you too would drink and get high if you had the life I had. And this old timer like spoke up and he's like, yeah, but you're 20 something years old now, man. What are you going to do about it? Like, you're going to keep
Right.
going down this way because of that, or are you going to like take some sort of responsibility and do something for yourself so that you don't keep living that way, and it and
Yes.
it
Yeah.
was so profound. I mean, yeah, duh, it's sort of easy now looking back, but back then I was really caught up in the blame and I was caught up in the reasons why I did what I did. The
Hmm.
disease wants to like isolate you, it wants to keep you withdrawn, it wants to keep you by yourself so it can work on you to where you actually will pick up a drink again or get high again or whatever your thing is. You're going to do it again unless you are continuously on a daily basis doing the things you need to do to stay healthier so that it
Uh-huh.
doesn't take over. Like I remember surrendering to the disease. I remember I came to under the bridge one day, and I just thought like, I don't care anymore. I'm gonna keep just doing this until I die. And I just went like deeper and deeper. And you think you can't get any deeper, but you can, you know.
Hmm.
And whatever freedom of choice I had at that moment, I surrendered it to like just some people call it the F it, and
Hmm.
I surrendered to that basically. And I had never done that in my life before. That was the first
Sure.
time. I was like 37 years old, and I'd given up. I had my daughter was at the time, she was like God, 4, I think, 4 or 5. And I had been in and out of her life already like too many times. I wasn't
Hmm.
there for her at all. It was just too much,
Hmm.
you know. Um,
Yeah, it sounds like you made a decision to to just not be there. To you didn't care about the outcome. Like you said, you surrendered to the disease. So what changed after that that made you turn around?
so within a few days, I was like worse than I ever probably could have been mentally. I was just doing whatever it took. I was walking into stores and just grabbing alcohol and asking for some cigarettes and acting like I was gonna pay, and then they would give me cigarettes and I would have the alcohol and I would just walk out, and they would be yelling and jumping over the counters, and stuff like that was happening. I started thinking, man, I'm gonna like rob a bank or rob a store or
Hmm.
something like really off the chain, something that just would like put me away for a long time if I ever actually did that and got caught. And what happened was I was walking down the street like I always was, and if a policeman would see me, the angels in blue. I didn't call them that then, but I get it now. Like that's really what they were. And a lot of these police officers in the area would pull over, do a U-E, and come back to me, and they would always sit me down and talk to me. Every one of them.
Oh
They
wow.
never ever
Hmm.
tried to like act like they were better than me or anything. They would search me a lot of times. I wouldn't have anything on me, and then they would talk to me. And at that time I got, they pulled me over, and I had some stuff on me, and I remember he's like putting me in the back of the car, and I felt relieved. Like I felt so
Yeah.
relieved, like, oh God, thank you. If you're really there, thank you for this. And that's not something you say when you're going in the back of a police car if
Sure.
you're a normal person,
Hmm.
and I did. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. Like I'm gonna get some rest now. And that's what happened. I something happened to me on that drive to the county jail where I just like surrendered again. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And from that day, from that next morning when I woke up, came to whatever, however it is, I made a commitment then, like I'm gonna go to the AA block. I'm gonna put a request in to go to where they have those meetings, and I'm gonna do whatever I gotta do to make this like different.
Uh-huh.
And I started doing that. And a year later, when I got out of jail, as usual, I would get out of jail and I would swear I was gonna be living right and I wasn't gonna get high and I wasn't gonna drink.
Uh-huh.
The thought came to me, and they talk about the obsession in our books of how we get that obsession, um and we can't stop once we get that obsession. And that's what happened. I had this obsession and I got off the bus where I shouldn't have got off, and I walked into the store and I had $1.88 in my pocket. That's all I had when the police arrested me a year before, and it was enough
Oh,
to buy a 40 ouncer. I think it was like $1.75. And I
uh-huh.
reached
Did
in,
you?
well, a 32 ouncer, and I reached in the cooler and I was gonna grab this 32 ouncer, and it wasn't no profound voice or anything, but something just said, nah, don't do it. And I put it
Wow.
down. And I was
Mm.
thirsty, but I didn't grab anything else to drink. I just walked out of the store, you know, and I kept walking down, and I was walking where I was headed was I was going to the Palmetto House because I had
Uh-huh.
reserved a bed there while I was in jail. One of the COs said, "Hey man, why don't you try this time?" And he had never done that before. I knew him by name, and
Mm-hmm.
he knew me by name, and he's like, "Man, you got to do something different. Otherwise, you're going to
Well,
keep
that's what
ending up
I
coming
was
back."
just thinking of that. I'm like, wow, that's a
Yeah.
really big moment because
Mhm.
your hand was in that cooler and you decided to do something different. That small change,
Right.
something different, like, and if you want something different, you have to do things differently. And that's like the first time you said, no, I'm not going to do that.
Right. The
Nah,
very first time I said no.
the
I've
very
never said that.
first.
Yeah. And started walking down the street, and I was like looking for cars. Maybe a dope dealer would see me, and I'm fighting this obsession in my head. And I'm like, please, God, if you're really there, please just help me get to where I'm going. I don't want to do this anymore. And like, I believe like the higher power really knows what's in your heart to this day. Like I never thought that before, but to this day I know now, like he had my best interest, like he helped me get through it. And not only that, he gave me that experience of going through it to help me
To
feel
know
the
that you
strength,
could. Hmm.
right? To give me the strength, the power that he gives you when you ask for the help, and but here it is again. My disease kicked in as I approached the next store. And I swear to you, I was headed into that store and I heard voices along the side of the building. And I look over and there's people sitting on the wall over there, and they're getting out of their cars and they're all headed into it was a little clubhouse. And I know the clubhouse I'm talking about. Um, and instead of going in the store, I went into that meeting. It was a meeting.
Wow.
Who would figure there's a meeting time right then, No coincidence. And I walk into that meeting, and it was scary to walk in there, and I saw these people, and some of them were familiar. My sponsor was sitting in there, and he was behind the coffee. My ex-sponsor from one of the treatment centers that I went to. He was my sponsor at that time, and he reaches out his hand and he's like, "Man, I've been waiting for you." And I thought, no way, you weren't waiting for me. I wrote you letters in the jail and you never sent me any money. You never wrote me a letter back, nothing. And what are you talking about? But my insecurity was so strong, I reached out and shook his hand anyway, you know? Like I
Mm-hmm.
could not shake his hand because I was so insecure. And I'm glad I did. I shook his hand and I sat down and I had no idea what the meeting was about. I just remembered something in my head was just saying, ask him to be your sponsor again, you know, ask him to be your sponsor. And at the end of the meeting, I went up to him. I said, look, I said, can you please be my sponsor? I can't do this on my own. And
Truth.
he said,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, he said, as long as you're willing to do a few things. And he's like, well, you know, this guy's an atheist slash agnostic, he calls himself. To this day, he calls himself that. And he said, and I said, I don't know if I could be willing to do those things. And he said, well, you maybe need to pray for willingness. And you know, how
Hmm.
profound is that? An
Right.
agnostic, atheist guy telling me to pray, you know, for willingness. And you know, from that day forward, it's been nothing but a uphill uphill go. You know, like
So that
I
was
rem-
18 years ago, right? So,
that was 18 years ago, and
and you
some
have
yeah,
not had any alcohol or drugs since 18
I put
years.
I put nothing in my body that affects me from the head up. You know,
So that's
nothing
incredible.
whatsoever.
So from that moment that you reached into that cooler and you just made that small shift
Hmm.
and did something different, all of these things start to happen. You know, the
Right.
voices, these people start to be placed in front of you.
Hmm.
Wow. So tell us a little bit, listeners, because your life, from what you just described, is so different today. I mean, you have everything that you could possibly want. And tell us a little bit about what your life looks like today as a result of that decision back then.
Like one of the big things for me was like I never got my GED, you know. So one of the big things was after about a year, my sponsor, he's like, "Look, man, you know, go get your GED," you know. And so I went and got my GED, and from that day forward, it was like nothing but education. You know, like I wanted
Yeah.
an education. I thought like, okay, you know, had enough common sense to know like if you want to be a certain thing, you got to have the education to do it and the piece of paper that shows you. So I got an AS degree in addictions. You know, it was a
Wow.
special
Mm-hmm.
course that they just started at Daytona State back then. And then I, you know, from that AS degree, I took a few more classes and got an AA degree, which is, you know, just a general AA degree so that you can go for your bachelor's. And I thought, okay, you know, what's wrong with me? And the alcoholism thing wasn't everything that was wrong with me. I had a lot of other issues. So I thought, let me take psychology like a lot of us addicts do, you know. So I got a bachelor's, a BS in psychology. And
Wow.
after
Mm-hmm.
that, I thought I had some opportunities that were sort of handed to me, I guess.
Okay.
You know, I've started working at a treatment center, an outpatient treatment center with a
Mm-hmm.
guy in town that owns some recovery houses, and I started living at one of those houses, and became a house manager there, and I ended up like doing the whole deal there. I got, you know, finished my bachelor's degree there, and worked at the treatment center, and they let me do, believe it or not, they let me start like doing groups and stuff, and I was like,
Sure.
you know, they say after 90 days you probably want to be a counselor. It took me about a year and a half to like realize like, okay, maybe I could be a counselor.
Who better to relate to other alcoholics and addicts than someone who lived it? You
Right.
know,
So,
how better to
yeah.
show somebody how to get out of that?
So like I found this new freedom inside of myself and good feelings that I got from helping others, and I just went full force with it, you know, like I thought,
Yeah.
okay. The first time I got sober and clean, I started a painting business and thought that was like if I make some money and get a house and marry the girl, you know, that my life would get good. But this time around, I realized like I need to be in the middle of this thing because if I'm
Yeah.
not in the middle of it, I'm just gonna fall off like I
What a
did the
smart
last
thought.
time,
Yeah. That is so true.
you know. I then now started going for my master's degree, and some of the people in there were very inspiring, you know. So I had saved some money and I had some financial help after paying all my debts off, and I was able to, you know, when the housing market was really bad back then, it was actually good for me because
So you
I was
purchased
able to
some properties.
I purchased one house that was really cheap at the time, and that was the original First Avenue to Freedom. And then from there, I like 2 more years later, I bought another house, and then a few years later after that, I bought another one, and you know now we have 26 beds for guys that
Wow.
are like hopefully coming from where at least I came from, if not, you know, better than that even. I like to help the guys that were like low bottom drunks, we call
Sure.
them,
Uh-huh.
from the streets, because that's what I consider myself to be. But I'll help anybody really that comes to us. I can't believe, you know, within 10 years I had a master's degree, and I'm about a year away from having a PhD in
Wow.
psychology. I put it off for a while because I got, you know, I have little toddlers now and a new marriage that I'm in.
You went from going to 5 different high schools to get your GED, and now you're a year away from your PhD.
Right, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
incredible.
something.
They say some of the lowest bottoms, become some of the biggest advocates for change when they get well. And, from being homeless for your middle school years, your high school years, to now having almost a PhD and having a complete facility for men, 26 beds to help people who are exactly like where you were is absolutely incredible, and to turn around and use that for that. It's just a really huge testament to like what can happen if you put it down and keep it down and start to change your life. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. It amazes me. I don't feel like it's anything I did. I just feel like it's like a gift from, like, we get another life if we surrender to a higher power, and we surrender to like other people that have done what we're trying to do and walk before us, that like your whole life
Sure.
can change, you know?
And you had mentioned, not being in your daughter's life when she was 4 or 5. How has your walk as a father changed in sobriety?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I got sober when she was 10. You know, kids are very resilient, as was I too, you know, and I could just say like she forgave me right away. She just wanted me in her life. She wanted to have a dad that was healthy, and she was very wise at 10. You know, I remember her telling me this at 10 years old. And I said, well, good, you know, like I'm just going to try to be there for you as much as I can be there for you and do whatever I can do for you. And, you know, one of the greatest gifts of sobriety is like that's been possible to do that for her, you know. Like I've had her sweet 16 birthday party. I bought
You
her
threw the
first
party. Mhm.
car, first couple cars,
Incredible.
you know, and helped her get through college and all that stuff. Just yeah, and now we have a granddaughter from her,
That's
and she's married
incredible.
to this really nice guy. You know, that's yeah, it's pretty cool. It's really
And
cool.
she's
And
absolutely beautiful and completely talented. She's a photographer. Is that correct? Does she
yeah,
do
she's a
photography?
photographer. She does. She's, you know, with the new baby, she's kind of taking a break from all that, and she's just being a new mom, and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff is going on right now. So, but yeah, she did it on her own for a while, and she'll probably do it again, I would imagine. Um, but yeah, and I got a 2-year old and a 4-year old about to
Two
be
and a
3
four
and
year
about,
old. Two.
yeah, it's crazy how like being clean and sober, and I'm there every day present.
And you're a complete girl dad. All
Yeah, yeah.
girls.
Well, that's a whole nother subject. Yeah, yeah. Definitely a great life. You know, one of the greatest things I ever heard in the beginning was stick around till the miracle happens. I would go to meetings long enough to realize, like, hey, if they got sober, so can I. And no matter how hard the day was or what was going on, I would try to stick around until the miracle happens. And what I came to believe was that the miracle had happened from the day I
It had
walked in.
happened. Wow.
Yeah, it had already happened, and it can happen for you.
Where can people connect with you and with First Avenues to Freedom?
They can always call me at my phone number, 386-295-5872. If I can't help you, I can pretty well get you to where you need to get some help. I have a lot of resources and people I know in the community that can pretty much help with almost anything that's going on in your life.
To connect with Chris or inquire about his services, visit firstavenuetofreedom.com. That will also be in the show notes if you're driving and you can't write that down. So be sure to check that out and reach out if you or someone you know needs help. Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.